Welcome to United Jews channel.
Hello, my name is Kevin.
Hello, my name is Daniel.
Do you want to talk about the pros of opening schools first or the cons of opening schools?
I think we should start the cons of opening schools first.
Okay. The cons of opening schools are the COVID numbers are gonna increase really high, and then, in my opinion, we're just gonna have to end up closing schools a few weeks after it opens.
In addition to that, we put more and more teachers at risk because they are older than the kids. Well, the kids they've shown to show immunity, or for the most part, to COVID. Teachers and other older people suffer much more, and their mortality rate is much higher than a kid's.
Yeah.
So
Also, their mortality rate is higher. But another thing to talk about is when the teachers teach the kids with all the social distancing happening, kids aren't going to be able to work together, and they're going to get less information out of school.
yeah, it really inhibits a lot of the strategies that were taught in schools, and taught to teachers to teach. A lot of the group work methods, a lot of different ideas that they've had in the past don't work. And one of the things that I think humanized school was like extracurriculars, and there's going to be none of those for what I think are obvious reasons.
Yeah.
I think that the lack of social interaction in school is problematic, but at the same time, I think it's better because humans are social creatures. We've been socializing since our previous evolution, and it's important to realize that not having enough social interaction is really bad for different people.
Yeah. And that would be more of a pro to opening schools because we'll have more social interaction.
Yeah, but at the same time, I'd argue it's a con because you could put it like, oh, now you can't talk to friends in school, but before you could outside of school. If you kept things, the way that they are, you could still talk to people and talk to friends, but online. But in person, that would be restricting your ability to talk to those people.
Yeah. Another con, I think, is that the COVID scientists found that the COVID stays in air for like hours. It can't stay in air for hours. And when schools, they like wipe down surfaces, they try to clean the schools. I don't think that does anything because it's just going to end up in the air and still going to increase dramatically.
Yeah, the issue becomes more of like interior spaces. That those are the places that COVID spreads the easiest. So stores, indoor like arenas, and when people are person to person, that's where it hurts the most. And school is one of those places where everything is indoors, unless it's like physical education, and that becomes outdoors. But for the most part, class is taught inside, and the only way I could see distance learning working where they have to is when they have to move all of their furniture outside and have outdoor school. Maybe in tents, they had like tents set up to cover in case of rain or something. And kids would be working literally outside because they can't have indoor stuff. But that's very inefficient cost-wise. It's very expensive to move everything. So they have to have insurance for everything that costs money. A lot of various things could go wrong with moving schools outside, but that would be a potential solution if they were that concerned about COVID being in the air.
Yeah, that's a good
because it
point.
completely minimizes the risk of spread.
They could do that. But there's still a really big con to me, which is when we look at like schools have been open. They've been trying to open schools, and as soon as they open it, they just have to close it again because the COVID numbers just are so high.
Yeah, there was that one picture from I think Georgia that went viral a few days ago. And
Yeah, I saw it.
they instantly shut the school down after that.
Yeah,
It was pretty scary because they reported massive spike in COVID numbers, like 36 at a time or something like that, just in the school alone. Not even outside of the school, just from inside the school, there were that many people who just got it out of nowhere.
but there are also
Go ahead.
there are also a lot of pros to opening schools.
That's true. I think the social interaction, we've noticed that suicides and psychological problems increase when we have people stuck at home like we do right now. And that's a really
Yeah.
big issue. And it's important that we consider which one will ultimately take more lives, whether it's going to be suicide or the pandemic, because currently suicide is increasing. Everyone is so sequestered and isolated that it's hard for them to keep their heads up. But
Yeah, I think suicide and mental illness are becoming a bigger problem now, but I still think we need to take COVID and take all the precautions that we need to stop deaths, because I think that's ultimately killing a lot more people than suicide and mental illness.
from what I remember reading, I think suicides in California have gone up like over 50%. And that's a lot. It's a lot to think about. If there's that many people taking their own lives. And also have to remember that during these 5 months, there have been lots of kids that need to start school. And starting school online, learning detrimental, like very important education to their future careers online is much more difficult and taxing, not only on the teachers, but the students to understand concepts like that. Basic math can't be explained in person. Basic English writing sentences, grammar, punctuation can't be explained in person. And a lot of those very basic things must be explained in person to be fully grasped. But online, it's much more difficult to do so.
Yeah, the problem with opening schools is that it's not really going to help people with mental illness that's developing, I think, because you're going to barely be able to see your friends, and you're not going to have any clubs.
Yes, but then the issue falls on how exactly do we reopen schools? If we reopen schools to the bare minimum, not offering anything that could potentially ruin, if we open the schools up to the point where just the bare minimum is there, kids will still be able to see teachers, they'll be able to be with friends. And we're assuming that indoors, everyone's wearing their masks, everyone's attempting to keep social distancing alive. We're assuming that all of these requirements will be followed, whether it's by the kindergartners through the 12th graders. I think a more interesting proposition becomes college, because I know some colleges, they've either pushed back their opening or they've done everything online, or some people, they're letting them move into the dorms, but they won't actually be starting classes. Like you'll be doing all of your work indoors and stuff like that. I think also schoolwork becomes more problematic. I know most kids, because they were unable to take final exams, or the ones that did were lucky, but the ones that didn't, they had to take on much more work than what they were usually used to. In my case, I had 6 projects in 2 weeks, and they were all one on top of the other. I think the grading system took a hit as a whole because kids who were failing 11th grade or whatever grade, they with pass fail, they get a 4.0 because that's how it's counted. It's A or F. It's not, there's no B, C, D in the middle.
Yeah, I think definitely it's a lot easier to learn at school. I don't think anybody's arguing that it's not. I think we need to find a way to ensure that barely any people get the coronavirus, and teachers should definitely stay at home. I think we can find a solution to all of this. Like, students only go to school. There are like different groups, and students go to school like once a week, and
Yeah.
some teachers volunteer to make sure everything's stable, and the old ones stay at home and on Zoom do everything.
I think one of the better solutions that I've heard is a cohort system, but it needs to be adjusted to fit other schools. If we adjust it per the amount of people that are in the school, we can then determine, how many people are going to be in the school at this one time, and base it on also other factors like how big the school is. In my case, I go to a small school, and we have 200 kids. So if we have 200 kids, we need to divide the classes up not by grades, but based on what the CDC says, like the amount of space a person will take up. If we realize that 6 feet apart is what it takes, we need to be able to accommodate every student who's in the school being 6 feet apart at a given time. And that, to me, I think is most important way is how to implement that. And I think the cohort system is probably one of the better ones, but there is no perfect solution because as soon as we reopen schools, someone's bound to get sick one way or another. Because not all the time will people be able to socially distance. Not all the time will people be able to wear a mask for whatever reason. And that becomes a problem.
I think another thing we can try is either opening up just middle schools and high schools, or just high schools, and use the space that the elementary schools have to store more people, and maybe have less people in one building so we can divide them evenly, and you'll still get to see your friends. That sounds like a good solution.
I think outdoor schools, if we set up, depending on how much space the school has, you could, in theory, set up outdoor school with very minimal classes indoors. Where you have a giant tent covering some sort of lawn or yard. In our case, we have a courtyard. If we divide the courtyard up into their own classrooms, but everything's in tents and it's open air, and then the scrubbing down of different elements such as like tables and chairs and whatever works a lot better. And that way you minimize the amount of people actually entering indoor spaces and the virus doesn't continue to spread. So if you think of like for the most part, from what I've seen, unless it's a very small private school, every school has some outdoor capabilities. And the schools that don't have outdoor capabilities have to be kept on this lockdown, or the no schools being reopened.
Yeah, but also if we make it outdoor schools, like go in like a courtyard or a playground that the school has, it's going to be a lot harder to have like old teachers doing a Zoom call when it's outdoors, because they're going to need to bring like a small laptop. And
the thing is, though, is that most teachers already bring laptops to school because it's not only more convenient for the school, it's also cheaper for the school. Because to get a good quality workstation, it's a $700-800 computer, But if they bring a laptop, like a Mac or something that's already issued, or a Chromebook, that's $300-400. So they already save money. the weather might differ, but I feel like as long as you're not working in the middle of a snowstorm or something that's hazardous to your work environment, then it should be fine. Tents should cover any snowfall or anything. If there's extreme wind and there's extreme problems with the weather, that can be covered in advance. One of the things that I was also interested in is like, how is the SAT going to work? How are standardized tests? So we've already seen a lot of schools go test optional. There's a few that are left who are not. The UC system is recently under complications with this SAT, and I think the SAT poses an interesting question as to, are people even going to be able to take tests outside? That's like the first thing that I would think of is like, okay, if we do an outdoor test, or if we do outdoor seating and classes and stuff, I feel like the best place to test that is a standardized test where it's party neutral. It doesn't pertain to schools. It's owned by its own organization, still monitored by the government, and they can see and track growth of the virus, assuming they hold an SAT test in a tent or something like that.
Yeah, I took my finals online, and I think tests we can do it online too, because you can just like, if you just fill out a piece of paper, I think you can just move that over to online. I don't think that'll be a big deal.
And
It will be harder to study for them.
in my case, online became really problematic towards the end of the year. I don't know how they did it in your school, but in my school, the projects were too much. It was borderline like dangerous to keep working, because all I did was after every class I'd sit down and do my work, and it was to the point where I would work nonstop, barely make any headway, and I wouldn't be able to see the light at the end of the tunnel, and I'd go to sleep at around 10, exhausted, and that cycle would repeat.
Yeah.
So I think if they're coming up with online learning, they have to be more lenient. They have to understand that students aren't just machines. They're students, they're people. And
I think there should be a lot of extra credit work too. Like if there's a hard assignment, they should have like a class where anybody that's struggling can go, and the teacher will help them personally, help them through the problem that they're having.
yeah, it would be really cool to see schools go back, but they have to start thinking outside of the box, because I don't think they'll be able to have indoor schools until the vaccine is out. It might be maybe at best mid 2021. So like
Yeah.
May-ish.
I think we need to try to open schools at least with all these precautions. And if it doesn't work, if the corona numbers just go really high, then that is when we should stop and take a lot more precautions.
Another
like
thing
online
to
learning.
consider is a lot of those nations that we saw have really bad surges. They instantly took everything much more, they cracked everything down all the way to the brink. And I know the US government isn't like that, but that could completely eliminate the virus if they decided to do something like what happened in China or what happened in Italy, where they just built temporary hospitals. They completely eliminated people in like walking out of their homes. They made sure that nothing, like no in, no out. In that regard, if they completely just lock down everything, because we've been a lot more lax on this process than other schools and than other countries, I mean. And if we really buckled down, we had very strict laws on the matter on what people could do, and we didn't start the reopening process so early, we could probably drive this virus into the ground. That would be
Yeah, I think that what other countries are doing may be best for the virus, but our country has certain amendments that we have to follow, like freedom of privacy, freedom of speech, like wearing a mask is your own right. You don't have to. And I think everybody should, but it's also an amendment that you do not have to.
Agreed that everybody should. And I think most important is keeping everyone as far away from each other as possible. I think schools could be the potential only exception to this rule, but we maintain social distancing guidelines because I think knowledge is very important to the success of the future. And if we don't buckle down on that, that could be a very big problem. Um, what do you think about how vaccinations should work for COVID? Because assuming they find a vaccine, what should they do?
I don't think they should be mandatory. Because there are obviously it takes time to make these vaccines, and it's going to be problematic. And even with the flu vaccine, it's not always going to work. So I don't think it should be mandatory. And I also think people, as soon as the vaccine comes out, people are going to take it. So I think if you personally want to take it, you should wait a little bit when everybody else takes it and see if it works and what are the health side effects.
Yeah, I think that's what they're testing right now. They have preliminary vaccines and they have tests. That's what they're developing right now. And I think that vaccine should be a choice in this case. I think that the younger kids, since they have such a high tolerance to COVID, and there's, I think, out of all of these deaths that have happened in the U.S., there has been either one or two child-related deaths. All of the other ones are older generation, and I think that by that logic, the older generation should be getting their proper treatment first, rather than the kids. So, and by that exact logic, I don't think the vaccines would be necessary for kids, and instead of vaccinating everyone, we just vax the adults.
Yeah. So I think we both agree that we should open schools, just take the right amount of precautions, whether it's outside learning or moving between schools, just having not that many people at the school at the same time. And that will help mental health and help education, and hopefully not making spikes in COVID.
Agreed.
Yeah.